Welcome back to Salty Sunshine. We have a special guest. Her name is Dr. Monica, correct?
Yes, correct.
Monica, so nice to meet you. Thank you for coming on. I'm so excited to talk to you about your experiences in Cuba.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for inviting me. And, finally we get to do this. I know we've been going back and forth, but finally we found a good time and
Yes.
days that work for both of us.
So I came across your socials. I saw you talking about Cuba, and it was really interesting. And I have Cuban parents. I was born and raised in Miami, but my parents are Cuban. But my parents also came when they were like three, so they don't really know anything about Cuba either. So I've always been so interested to hear about what it's actually like over there. And so what I know about you is that you came to the U.S. when you were five, lived most of your life in Miami, and then your mom, who was a single parent at the time when you were 13, she was having some struggles with you. You were acting up as all 13-year-olds do, and she shipped you off to Cuba to live with your aunt.
Yes, correct. Let me start off with, I was born in Cuba. My mom is Cuban. My dad's from Madagascar. So they met in Cuba, and I was able to leave Cuba with a special permit called El PRE, which allows you to leave Cuba and then come back and stay in Cuba for a total of 11 months. So that's how I was able to go back. So then I went to Madagascar. I lived there until I was five. Then I came to Miami. I lived here my entire life. And then at 13 years old, my mom was a single mom. She was working, all these jobs. And I was a rebel. I was a little bit more rebellious than your natural 13-year-old. And so she sent me to Cuba. She sent me to live there with my aunt.
I actually have a friend from high school, and she was a rebel as well, and she was acting up a little too much, and her mother sent her to live in Italy with her sister. So it's not uncommon.
Well,
Yeah.
I would have rather gone to Italy than Cuba for sure.
Well, Cuba was closer. Um, when you were 13, were you kicking and screaming? Were you excited to go?
It was a very weird time of in my life. I mean, again, my mom was the only one that was there for me. I really didn't have a lot of family. I wasn't doing well in school. I had the issues with my dad because he was in my life. So I think I was kind of like numb when she told me, oh, I really can't handle this. I'm going to send you to Cuba. And I said, okay, I'll go and I'll, who knows what will happen. I mean, I'm not happy here. So let's see what the other side of town has to offer, in other words.
And obviously, when you go there, you are going to visit family and stay with family you don't know, you don't remember.
Yeah, so I had gone previously. I had gone like during the summer, like a lot of kids usually do. But it's not the same when you actually live there. So when I lived there, I lived with my aunt. My aunt, she was a doctor in Cuba, a medical doctor. But that doesn't mean anything because medical doctors make like $25 a month. But she had a couple of connections, so we lived like, I guess, an okay life. It wasn't extremely poor, but compared to here, it was a complete culture shock for sure.
I can imagine. If you don't mind me asking, did your parents just get divorced, or your dad went back to where he lived, or?
So my dad stayed in Madagascar. We left when I was five because there were a lot of like mosquitoes and there were a lot of like different. My mom was getting very sick. I have the Madagascaran blood, so I wasn't getting sick, but she was. So we had to come here, and it was like this complicated thing where they just kind of split up. So that's basically what happened.
Wow, that's so interesting. So you get to Cuba, and obviously you've been there before, but so what part of Cuba is this? Because I know Cuba is it's a pretty big island, no?
Yeah, so I lived in Havana, in El Vedado, which is a part in Havana. So that's where I live. So it's very like city.
Wow. So tell me what it's like your daily life.
So I remember arriving to Cuba and I was like, gosh, it is so hot. Like it is excruciatingly hot. Um, it's almost the same temperature as here, but here we have all these commodities. We have AC here, we have it in our car. They didn't have AC over there. I didn't have AC in my house. So it was
No AC anywhere?
nothing. There's no, well, now there's some AC units in different places, but it's really illegal to have. So I didn't have AC at all. Thank God that a lot of the homes in Cuba are colonial style, so they have these really big windows and they're very tall, and they allow the air to circulate. So that kind of helps out the situation a little bit. But yeah, the heat was something that I was like, oh my gosh, this is
How
ridiculous.
can people sleep, right?
Well, we all had fans, so the fan became my best friend. Those like old Russian fans that we had, but it did its job, so it was good.
Yeah, and so your daily life, I know that you have, I think this is common knowledge that everyone gets those booklets and you
Yeah,
have a ration of food.
yeah. So since I went to Cuba with un pre, I wasn't necessarily like a citizen or like someone, from Cuba, per se. So I didn't get an ID. I didn't get a booklet. So I would use my family's booklet, and I would go to, well, let me just walk you through a natural normal day. So in the morning I would wake up, and then I would get the booklet, and I would go to La Bodega, which was like right around the corner, and then they would give you a bread for like 3 pesos or 1 peso. I can't remember what it was, and then you would get like a little bit of rice, a little bit of all those things. So that was the first thing that was shocking, because we didn't have those things here. And then and then after, I would get ready for school. So in Cuba I was in seventh grade, and in seventh grade everyone wears the same uniform, which was another thing that was shocking. Like the entire island, like who's in middle school, because they wear the same uniform, which were the
Mhm.
mustard colored skirts with the white blouses. um, so then I go to school for the first day of school, and they're all singing like this hymn, right? And I have no idea. I have no idea how to sing it because I haven't lived in Cuba. But I kind of, did what they were doing, which was something like this. And then after that assembly, you would go to your class.
And you could just enroll in school because of the special passport with the special paper you have.
You know what? That's something that I've never really questioned. Again, I was 13 years old. My priorities were different, and I really didn't question a lot of things. I think looking back, I think my aunt must have spoken with a director or something, and I don't know if given her like money, or like I don't know. She as Cubans say, resolvió that situation, so I was able to go to school.
And why did you get that pass? Do a lot of people get that pass, or why did you get that?
Everyone who leaves Cuba with someone from another country, they give
Okay.
them that special pass
So because of your dad.
because of my dad. Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's so interesting. All right, so you go to school, and in school, do they feed you or?
No, no. So they feed kids in elementary school, like jail food. It looks like jail food. I've never been to jail, but I can just imagine. But in middle school, no, you don't get fed. The class was, I think it started like at 8 o'clock in the morning until like 1:45, 2 o'clock. And then we would have like a recess, and that's when many like people just brought their own snacks, or there was someone that would sell, little things, pastries here and there. So that's basically what we ate.
And did you walk to school or there's
Yeah.
buses?
I walked to school. It was about maybe like 10 blocks, 10 blocks in the morning. I actually liked, that was the part that I liked, because I feel like here we were, at least during that time, right? Like all the kids are like, usually you have to depend on your parent to bring you to places and things like that. And for me, I absolutely loved having that independence, like being able to walk from my house to my school. Like I loved it. So I actually got a kick of like walking there every
How
day.
how long ago was this?
So that was about 20, I was 13, so 25-ish, 20.
So you still have family there?
No, I really don't. No, everyone came here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, that's good for them.
yeah.
I'm only asking because I was curious. Do you think it's the same as when you were there, or do you think anything's changed?
So I went back to Cuba, I would say a couple years ago, like maybe, I don't know, 6 years ago, something like that. Prior to COVID, I went back to Cuba, and of course, this time I stayed in a hotel. And this is the interesting part that I do want to speak about, because a lot of people say, well, I've been to Cuba and it's completely different and it's so cool, and nothing that you post, I don't see any of these things. So I went back to Cuba, and I stayed this time in a hotel because I didn't have family members there. And when I went, of course, it was completely different because you're staying in a hotel.
Hmm.
You're, as they call Yuma, because you come from the outside, and they
And
treat you differently.
you no longer have that pre? No?
So I got rid of that. I got rid of it because you had to like renew it all the time. And I'm like, I'm never going to really stay in Cuba for 11 months again. So let me just get rid of this. So no, I went in with when
Okay.
you go into Cuba, if you're born in Cuba, you always have to go in with a Cuban passport.
Okay.
So I went in with my Cuban passport and then you use the American one to come back.
Okay. So you stayed in a hotel,
So
like all the.
I stayed in a hotel, and of course, the treatment was completely different. Although I do have friends that live there, and my friends, I went to their house, and everything was the same. Like it hasn't, like time has not passed by. Like it's the same.
And that's so scary because obviously, with the same sentiment of like what your daily life is, like the cars are like all from the 50s,
Yeah.
right? And I always think, because I have a like I have trouble like changing out my cars because I feel like it's such a waste, right? If the cars like move, I don't really care about cars. It's not
Yeah.
like my thing. So I'm like, as long as it's in good condition, and I just it bothers me to like get rid of it. And then I'm like, look at the people in Cuba. I mean, their cars last from 1950. How could ours not?
Granted, these were Soviet Union cars. So a lot of I have a friend who's Russian, and we always compare stories because she lived in communism as well. And a lot of these cars, like Elada, Moscovi, I forgot what the other one was, but these are Russian cars that were donated by Russia. And they still work, but Cubans have had to do their little thing to make
Mhm.
them continue going. But yeah, it is interesting how long they've lasted.
Well, I'm sure they're constantly breaking down, but for
Yeah,
the most part, they try to make it work as, and they
right.
still, some of them, a lot of them
And,
still work.
and and honestly, it's a privilege. If you had a car over there, it was like a privilege. I remember that there were like, at 13 years old, you're like dating and you're thinking about boys and all that. And then the boys that had cars, it was like, oh my gosh, they have it was like this whole thing. And I'm like, why is it such a big deal?
I'm just so curious, and we'll go back to your daily life because I have other questions about it. But I'm just
Yeah.
so curious, like since it's not like a booming economy, obviously they don't have an economy. It's everything's like regulated. So for the most part, what does everybody do all day? Because not everyone can have a job because there's not all these businesses and stuff. Like it's not like here. Like what do they do all day?
So actually, it's not a booming economy, but everyone has a role. Like everyone, I think it's a societal thing um, that everyone has to work. Like it's very frowned upon if you don't work. Even women, like every woman, like for the most part, they all work. I do have to be honest about that part, right? Everyone has an education. Well, most people have an education. So again, I think it's a societal thing where if you don't finish high school, it's frowned upon by society. So it kind of works, and everyone
Where
does
do
have
they
like
work?
a job that they do.
Where do they work? How many jobs are there?
um that's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has something that they do. Like I didn't meet anyone that was like, oh no, I don't have a job, I just kind of chill at home, right? Whether they pay them like pennies or not.
Yeah. So do they have banks? Where do they keep their money?
They have banks. I never went to a bank, but they do have banks. They don't have like debit cards and things like that, or credit cards. Although like there has always been like a European, mostly like a Spanish kind of like union with Cuba. So sometimes some of those credit cards can be used in the island.
Yeah. So, and people have certain people have businesses, right? So who is allowed to have a business? Who's not? Do you know any? I don't know if you still know people there, so you must know a little bit.
Yeah, so things have changed, right? Things have changed. They've opened it up a little bit more. They've allowed people to have like timbirichis, which are like little restaurants and things like that. It's very highly regulated, so it's your business, but it really isn't. You have to pay a lot of taxes for it, and again, it's never really going to be yours. Everything in Cuba is the property of the state.
Right. That's right. So that's why I get confused because I'm like I hear people saying, "Oh, you could buy property," or how could you do that if nothing is really yours?
So let's talk about the properties. So it's kind of like quote unquote you can buy the property, but again, it's highly regulated. It's not like you can be like a realtor. I don't even think they have realtors over there. It's not like you can say, oh, let me invest in this property. That's not the way that it works. Which goes to like why there's so much, like so many familial conflicts over there, because the house that you're born into is basically the house that you're going to stay in. If you meet someone else, then you guys have to decide, are we staying in your house or in my house? It's not like all of a sudden you can purchase another house.
Yeah. So, okay, so you go to school, and so what does your weekend look like? What do you guys, is there places to like hang out? Or you just really just outside? You go to the ice cream shop? I don't know.
Yeah, so in Cuba, usually during the weekend, they would have parties, right? So imagine at 13 years old, I'm coming from here where people are like playing video games and things like that, to going over there where on Thursday or on Friday, they're like, hey, whose house is a party in? So there were a lot of like house parties, and then everyone would kind of go there to those house parties.
Okay, so they let you have parties.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you could have
I
parties.
just think
I
of
mean,
Cuba like,
obviously, you can have a party against the government, like it couldn't be
no,
that kind of party, but like a regular party, yeah.
I just think of Cuba and I think of like police line streets and then just like heavily policing everything. And that's just like my vision of Cuba because I feel like it's so
So it's
restricted.
not, you know what, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that's the image that a lot of people get. And it's not so, you don't see it overtly like that, but you feel it. And the reason why you feel it is because it's so highly indoctrinated that they don't even have to do that. They don't have to have police everywhere. You can't talk bad about Fidel when he was there, or bad about the system. You just don't, because it's indoctrinated. Every single subject in school had a bit of politics in it. Even math. Like, tell me, how do you put politics in math? I have no idea, but they did it.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so you're right. So they're just kind of like brainwashed and they're
Yeah.
already accustomed to living a
Yeah.
certain way and they know what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
Would you say that there's no crime?
So obviously, right, like this makes sense if the borders are closed, you don't have people like coming in bringing things or whatever. There's not a lot of drugs. Also, Fidel, or the communism, or everyone, they took away guns, and they took away, that's why Cubans are so high strung about, you cannot take that privilege, that thing away from me. But there were no guns. It was very hard to find a gun. So if you are going to commit a crime, I mean, you have to do it with your bare hands or with your a butter knife. So it becomes more difficult to do that. And they had like everyone knew each other, so you knew who was like the person that was not very a good element or whatever. So I think society, it was very difficult to commit a crime over there.
Yeah, for it's not for the lazy people.
Exactly. You have to be like, you have to really hate that person and want them like, out.
Yeah,
Um,
that's too much work.
the other thing to consider too is that if there were crimes, it wasn't reported, because newspapers, TV, all of that is highly regulated. They will
Right.
only put what they want you to see and know.
That brings me to the fact I'm a huge book reader. I'm obsessed with books. I love content. I love all that. Obviously, the Cubans don't have that, which is so sad to me because I love books. So I'm sure they have books, but it's not books like the books I read. It's not like juicy fiction.
They have books. I mean, so they have everything, right? Unless it goes against communism.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Like music, we would listen to all types of music. Like I remember when I went, which is 1999 or 2000, it was Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys. I mean, it was open, but we couldn't listen to Celia Cruz, right? We couldn't listen to Willie Chirino. So there were banned, some things that were banned that you just could not play.
And so you have like fiction novels, like popular ones?
So I never read fiction novels over there. I
Okay.
was more like just getting acclimated, and just going out, like doing what a 13-year-old would do. But yes, they have fiction novels, they have, everything.
Interesting. And then the TV, are there shows like sitcoms?
So now it's a little more open. However, in Cuba, you always had people to joke around, because they would say you only have two channels. So we only had two channels to watch, and one of them was just politics, like it was Fidel speaking or whatever, or what they used to call la mesa redonda, which is like a news thing. And then the other channel, it was again whatever they regulated. So they even had like cartoons for kids that had to do with communism and things like that. So a lot of
Wow.
things are highly
So
regulated.
people really didn't watch TV for entertainment, right?
Yeah.
Um, this is might sound silly, but I hear this and I'm like, well, is everybody like super in shape? Because all I can think about is like all you want to do is walk outside. You don't have much to eat. You can't
Right.
snack on a bunch of garbage. So is everybody just like in good shape?
I mean, like everyone else in this world, right? It depends what your eating habits are.
Yeah.
But we walked a lot, not because we wanted to, but because that was the only way to get around. So we were constantly walking. You wouldn't snack. So you would just have like your breakfast, you would have like your, like lunch and then dinner. And I'm speaking about me being like, I would say like middle class, right? Even though there's no classes, there really are classes, but I was like in the middle class, right? People who are poor like didn't have all these meals.
But
Um,
are people wealthy over there? They're wealthy. Like how if every isn't
like
everyone
every other country, the closer you are to the government, the more
oh,
advantages you have. And then a lot of people like were able to leave, like a lot of professionals were able to go out and come back, and they would bring like clothes and they would sell and they would do things like that. So there's always going to be different classes. That's just something that you cannot regulate. So even in communism, we had like the lower class, we had the medium class, and then people who are wealthier.
well, I've definitely heard of people, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard rumors that people will visit the US, get food stamps and all the stuff and take it back with them to Cuba.
I'm sure.
And I've heard that happening. I don't know anyone personally, but I've heard that that's a thing. So that might be a way of having a little more than other people. Um, so yeah, so you mentioned in one of your videos, like when the toilet paper shortage, you'd have to use newspapers, and then that's infrastructure. I feel like I would be scared, like the building's gonna fall at any moment. It just looks like
So again, at 13 years old, you're not thinking about those things. You're thinking about, going out with your friends, what you're going to wear, finding clothes to wear. Like that's really where your mind is, right? Which is normal, which is fine. But the toilet paper was, I don't even, I cannot remember like, my feeling or that first time where I had to use a newspaper. But I did several times. So there was just no toilet paper anywhere. Like even if you had money, you could not find toilet paper anywhere. No stores, nothing.
could you
Um,
use rags or towels, or that wasn't
no, we,
available
we
either?
had towels, but towels you can clean them, right? But things that you kind of you one time usage kind of things, those were the things that we sometimes didn't have. So like diapers, right? Like babies didn't have diapers. They had to use, and I have two babies. I'm like, how the heck did they do that? They had to use like a rag and like it was this whole thing. But the newspaper was interesting because you had to crumble it up and then use it, and it was just I don't even know
Well, and
how I
then
did.
can when you're on your girl stuff every month too. That what a nightmare.
Yeah. So my mom would send me some things from the US just so it was a little bit more comfortable. But obviously, I would see what my friends would go through. And sometimes when it ran out, you had to figure it out. Like Cuba did teach me a lot to just figure things out.
I always say like who did maybe 50 Cent or maybe more than one person has mentioned this, but I've heard, and it makes sense to me. It's like depression is for the rich, or people, or for people that have nothing to do. Because if you're living like that, all you do all day is figure shit
Survive.
out.
Yeah.
And you have no time to be depressed because all
Yeah.
you're doing is thinking about like, how do I get this done? So it's like, it's a blessing in disguise sometimes because it just keeps your mind busy and you become super resourceful.
Yeah. I mean, Cuba taught me what I know now. Not communism, because I know a lot of people are going to see us, are going to be like, "Oh, you're communist."
Yeah.
But I think going through that struggle for 2 years, because I went 2 years, going through that struggle definitely made me the person I am today. It made me humble, even if I have a lot or I have a little bit or whatever it is. It keeps your feet on the ground. It makes you value things that you have, and you also feel like you can survive anywhere, and
Yes.
that's such a good feeling.
I agree. And I do think people here obviously go through it too, and on different levels. Like
Yeah.
you went on a Cuba level, but there's people here that are struggling every single day that have four jobs and can't make it. So they still have that same feeling.
Yeah.
Just because
Yeah.
they live here, they just have more freedom and
Yeah.
more options.
Yeah, I mean, I would say because a lot of people have sent me comments of, oh, this is how it is here and this is how it is there. And I understand I've traveled a lot, so I know like you see this around the world. The main difference is that it's not a communist place. There's not a dictatorship. You have free speech, which makes the difference. And usually in these places, if you have money, if you're able to get money somehow, hustle, whatever it is, you're able to get these things. In Cuba, you can't. Like you
Hmm.
don't have it.
So going back to that, would you say Cuba is a religious place? Would you say?
So I was actually going to post a little bit about this because someone had asked me the same question. So they have Santeria, which Santeria was a merge of what the Cuban, what the Nigerian slaves brought to the island, and Catholicism. So it's a mix of both of those things, and they have Santeria. They've always had Santeria in
Which
Cuba.
I find horrifying, but yes.
So they've always had Santeria, and then religion was banned for a very long time because obviously in order to indoctrinate people, you have to kill all hope. So you ban other things that are going to preach different ideas. But now it's more open. Like you see Christians, you see Muslims, you see different types of religious. You see Jewish. There's a big like Jewish community in Cuba as well.
But would you say, you just made me think of something? Everyone that's in Cuba has just always been there and they're reproducing. No one moves to Cuba, right? From other places, like you, I
I
would
mean,
imagine.
except me. Like when they send me, they also have, you know, this is not a secret. Like it's always been something where people have said that Cuba does allow some terrorists to kind of stay there as like a way to run away from whoever they have
Mhm.
to run away from. So that's something too. And then there are some people that just kind of move to Cuba to live there for whatever reason. And they have a lot of like interchanges with different schools where they have students come and stay in Cuba. Like my dad, for example, he was from Madagascar and they gave him like a scholarship so they could go to Cuba and study there.
That's interesting. I just think why would anyone want to? Only because A, the AC, and because there's no free speech, and because you might maybe you're scared you can't leave.
Yeah.
Um, but I do know, and I think I saw you say it too, and I've always had that thought, which is kind of crazy, but it makes sense. As bad as Cuba is, which is awful, I would never want to be in that kind of environment. But places like Haiti or there's so many other places that are so poverty driven, and those people live worse only
Yeah.
because Cuba, you can count on that little that they give you. You can count on that,
Yeah.
and you know you're not going to starve, and you know you're not going to like you have certain things,
Mhm.
but it's a trade off, I guess, for your freedom. But other places are their people are much worse because they don't even give them that.
Right. Well, I mean, remember, everything in Cuba was created with a purpose. It wasn't just, oh, I'm just going to do this because of this. So the society in Cuba was created. So every single step it was. When is it that people revolt? When they're
Right.
hungry, when they're all those things, right? When they're starving, like there's absolutely no food. So I feel like the system was created to keep you alive, but
Yes.
not too little, so you're going to revolt. So you just feel
Sense.
like complacent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's so crazy, right? Did you ever read the book Last Year in Havana?
No.
Oh my gosh, you need to read that book. Do you like books?
I mean, I really don't have time because of my schedule now, so I tend to do audiobooks, but I tend to listen to like other types of books, not books about Cuba.
It's really it's kind of like a marriage between fiction and nonfiction. So
Okay.
it's Chanel Clayton is the author, and so her grandmother did live in Cuba, and she came to Miami, and so she grew up with her grandmother in Coral Gables, and
Mhm.
she's basically made a fiction story based off the reality of the stories her grandmother
Mhm.
told her
Oh, that's
of
so cool.
her
That's so
and her
interesting.
sisters, and her grandmother left Cuba right when that war was happening,
Yeah,
and they gave everyone the option to leave, but they were
yeah.
super rich in Cuba and they had their sugar business or whatever. And it's like a series of books. It's fascinating.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's amazing. I love this, one of my favorite books because you feel like you're there and you feel
Yeah,
like you're experiencing it, and it's like so sad because everyone did think when this transition happened that it was actually a really good thing because
yeah,
the president before him wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible like that.
yeah,
So they thought it was this new beginning, and like even her boyfriend back in the day was like fighting in the war thinking it was a noble thing, and it ended up being awful. So it's
yeah.
just a really good book. I
I mean,
recommend it.
Cuba just has like a history of having of having dictators. So that is when it becomes bad, right? When they have dictators, just like the same thing is happening with Venezuela now. So the Batista, which was a president before, he was a dictator. He used to murder people, all that. But since he wasn't communist, then the economy thrived. Fidel comes, things calm down a little bit. He takes away, all the guns and stuff, so people can't kill each other or whatever. But
Well,
then
he
he
lied to
introduces
everybody, right?
communism, and the economy goes down.
He kind of lied to everyone because he made it seem like he was going to be a certain kind of guy, and he switched it up
I
after.
mean, he sold them a dream, and I think until like the end of his time, he actually believed in that dream. So I don't know if it was like a little bit of a delusional disorder
Yeah.
that he had, or a narcissistic personality disorder. But he sold everyone the dream that he really passionately believed in. It wasn't like he came in and he was like, "Let me trick these people to get money." No, no, no. He believed in everything that he taught everyone. Like he
Yeah.
believed it to his core. And there's still people in Cuba that are like real hardcore communists.
Wow. Do you think the people in Cuba, since they don't have access to the outside world, because they don't have social media, I'm assuming.
Now they have, so now it's a little more open. Back when I went, there was no access, like no access whatsoever. I remember the phone calls were like quick. So you had to say, like, hi, what are the, 5 minutes, and that's it. So there was very little access. Now, it's not as limited. Like there are spots where you have Wi Fi and things like that, but it's not like the way we have it here, where you can just connect all the time.
I was going to say, do you think they know how the rest of the world lives, or it's just like a secret to them?
Well, now, right? I think for the last maybe like 7 years, it's opened up a little bit, so they see what's in the outside of the world. Of course,
Yeah.
some things are limited, and
Yeah, because it's probably like they have no real grasp of how they live is like so different than everybody else.
absolutely. And then that's when the issue comes to, because they think about the American dream, and it's very glossed, and people from that were Cubans that came to the United States that go back to Cuba to visit their family. Of course, they go with the best things and with the gold fill, like I like to call it the gold fill chains, and they're like, everything over there is beautiful and whatever. So they get sold this American dream, and then when they come here, they're like, hold on, this American dream, you have to work really hard for it. You have to pay taxes, which they're not used to. You have to pay for your house, which they're not used to. You have to work your butt off, right? Which again, they're not used to either. So it becomes a little conflictive, and there's people that can't, and they go back.
Really, that's so interesting.
I've met people that just could not. They've lived too many years in communism and in Cuba, and they don't like it here, and they'll go back.
That is insane. That's crazy to me. I can't even imagine leaving and wanting to go back.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's so nuts. So, all right, we covered like the food and everything. Oh, your friends. When you made friends over there, what did they ask you all these questions about where you came from, or
Yeah, so it was funny because when I first went to Cuba, um, and my friends tell me this after, right? Like everyone knows that you're not Cuban because you smell differently.
huh?
And I was like, what do you mean I smell differently, right? I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing. And they're like, you could just tell, first of all, you smell differently. Secondly, your mannerisms are different, the way you carry yourself. So basically, everyone knew that I wasn't from there. And they used to call me La Yuma. So Yuma means like United States. Like someone who goes to La Yuma is someone who goes to the United States. So they used to call me La Yuma. And I hated that because at 13 years old, I just wanted to fit in.
Yeah,
So little by little, I became more, I guess, Cubanized, and I was able to fit in. But at first, it was kind of like, oh, why is she here? No one knew. I didn't like to speak about it because it was a little traumatic for me. Um, so yeah, so then I met friends over there. Of course, the first days in school, I gravitated towards the bad crowd because again, I was used to that here. So I don't know, I kind of like, oh, this is the bad crowd. Let me make friends with them. And I did make friends with them. And then my aunt actually went to the principal and told her, look, can you please have her like hang out with the good crowd? So the principal did that. She told, the best of the girls there, like hang out with Monica, and they became my friends, and it was great, and I'm still friends with them until this day. They're all here, but I'm
you
still friends
spoke
with.
you spoke Spanish already when you
I did speak
went.
Spanish, but it was very broken Spanish. It
So
was
you
like Spanish, like from here,
so you perfected it when you as
I,
you lived
I
there.
definitely perfected it. And then I had to like learn also. They have a lot of like sign language. So they have a lot of like things that they do that mean things, and I'm like, what does that mean? So I had to learn that. I was always the odd one out that didn't understand. But yeah, it got to a point that I was like, oh, I fit in.
And how were they all able to come down here after?
Different methods, like some people crossed the border, other people had family here, so different ways.
So do you think Cuba tries to keep people there? They don't, or they're very kind of like lenient on letting people go?
Um, it's always a struggle. So everything in Cuba is a struggle, but I think it's mostly other people don't want Cubans to go there, right? Like I mean, they're not like just open, come on over kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like a struggle, and you always have to figure things out.
Yeah. Do you think, obviously Fidel died and now his brothers is in charge. Do you think it's softened up because of that? Do you think the brothers like different?
Um, I mean, the brother doesn't carry his ideology. Remember, Fidel was very like hardcore, like this is what I believe. We're gonna indoctrinate. We're gonna do all these things, right? And then of course, naturally, his brothers and other people weren't as hardcore as he is. So I think they've lessened it a little bit, and also because they're realizing that they cannot continue to survive if they don't open things a little bit more. So they've been opening up a little bit more. I think because of that, just because they need money.
Yeah, and like the people that build the tourist hotels that people stay in, obviously those were developers that went over there and built it because
Yeah. Yes.
everything is falling over in
Yeah.
Cuba.
So they have a big trade with they've always had with Melia with Spain and the Melia brand, and they've always had hotels that are Melia brands. I think I posted about I posted about this as well, that another thing that was shocking is that as a Cuban you could not stay in a hotel. So even if you had money, you could not stay in one of these hotels. It was just
Yeah.
banned.
Why do you think? Just they want to separate it.
They want to separate, right? Because again, if you are in this hotel, you're going to naturally speak with other people, and
Mhm.
they're going to tell you, "Hey, what?" They wanted to keep everything like very closed off, so everyone kind of like you're in the same bubble.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think so? Back when I asked you if they're religious, I guess they're not. I was going to ask you because I know there's prostitution over there, and you would think that they're so controlled that they wouldn't allow that, but they do, right?
It's like everything else, right? You can try to control everything, and there's parts that you're just not going to be able to control. And people have to hustle, and people have to do their thing. So Fidel actually, first he said that Cuba didn't have any prostitutes. When obviously, whatever country is struggling is going to have prostitutes. That's just going to happen.
Yeah.
So first he said that, and then he kind of said something along the lines of, if we had prostitutes in Cuba, they would be the most educated ones in the world.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's so, and so
So yeah, there were there still are prostitutes.
does the government give everyone like money too every month or just food?
Well, what they don't give you, they don't give you money. What
Okay.
they don't give you like an allowance. What they, I mean, you go to work, you make your money, and then they allow you to, I guess, buy things in a discounted way. So, for example, the libreta that we had where we would get the bread and everything else from La Bodega, it wasn't for free. We had to pay 1 peso or whatever it is, which wasn't like a huge deal, but it was still money we had to pay. But the government didn't really give you money.
Oh.
We didn't have to pay for the houses either. Like, it's not like you pay mortgage, it's not like you pay taxes. Like, you don't do those things.
So who gets to decide who lives where? Like, what if you wanted to move? You can't move, or like, where do you end? How do people get a place to live, or they just live where they've always lived?
Yeah, where you're born. Where you're
Wow.
born. Now, again, nowadays you have that possibility of like purchasing more things, right? But remember, if we're all the same, you shouldn't have extra money to invest in something. That doesn't make sense. So that's what they try to regulate. But back when I was there, it was wherever you were born, that was your house. So I had friends that lived with their uncles and aunts, that with their grandparents. Everyone had a room because these were like again big colonial
Mhm.
houses.
Yeah.
But they were just living there for years and years and years.
So all the buildings falling apart, or there's some that are still in good condition?
So because of the way the architecture is, and it's a very well made architecture, very like strong materials, some buildings are still like Some of them are hanging by a thread, some of them have fallen, and some of them are still there, intact, because they're made of stone, or whatever it is. Something that I do want to mention, so because I just thought about it when you mentioned the living arrangements. So something that you could do is you could permutar. Permutar meant, let's say I have like this 4,000 square foot house, right? And then someone died in your family that had a house or something. So I'm going to, in some sense, legally trade you this house for two smaller houses, because someone in my family got married and they want to have like their own thing. So you could do that trade.
So you do that like just personally? You don't
Well,
involve the
you
court?
do it legally. You do it
Okay.
legally, and then this is now where you live.
So they know where everyone lives. Like they're all on,
100%. Yeah.
right. So this is not like you can't do this like internally. You have to deal with.
I'm sure there's people that did it and no one would like find out. But then, if that person wants to take your house or whatever, then you get into those conflicts. So there were a lot of people that did lo de permutar.
Do you think there's a lot of handymen that like try to fix up the properties on their own
Oh,
or?
absolutely. You have
Yeah.
to. You have
Yeah.
to. Yeah. I think the best handyman here are Cubans. I don't know if it's because they learned from that or what, but like my handyman, he's Cuban, and he'll figure it out. Like I tell him, hey, can you do this? He's like, of course, I can. And if I don't, I'll figure it out. And he does an incredible job.
That's so true. Most of the handymen are Cuban.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your mother sent you over there. Is she still with us? Your mom is still
Yeah.
alive, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
is she happy with what she did? Was she nervous when she did it? Did she regret it? Was she terrified something might happen to you?
So you know what? My mom has always. A lot of people have said, you know how social media is, but they say things like,
Yeah.
"Oh, how can a good mom do that?" Whatever. For her to do that, to make that decision, she was completely desperate. Like
Yeah.
I was not a good child. I was a very bad child. It doesn't look like it, but I was a terrible child. So she was desperate. She really didn't know what to do. So I think that she made the decision with the best of her abilities. She sent me 1 year, and then I decided to go the next year. So she sent me from 13 to 14, and then at 14, I came back because I could only be there for 11 months. When I came back, I told her I want to go back, and she was like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yes." I had all my friends. I had all my life over there.
I
So
know.
I decided to go back, and we haven't really spoken about it actually after the years. I don't know.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So when you went back the second time, you're like, all right, this is enough. I don't want to come back anymore because I'm like, I don't want to suffer.
So actually, what happened? You learn to survive, and you just learn to survive, and that's you build your community there, right? So I would come here, and I had nothing here. So when I decided to go back the second year, I was 15 years old. I did my whole quinceañera there, all of that. And then in Cuba, after eighth grade, you have to pick, I guess, like your career. So you have to pick whether you go to El Campo, which no one wants to go there. You have to pick whether you go to La Leni. La Leni is like a very high end school. Um, and those are the only options, right? So
Mhm.
I actually tested for the school. I actually tested for the Leni, and I got a good score for math, but I didn't get a good score for Spanish, obviously. So I didn't get in, and then I came back. If I would have gotten in, I would have probably considered staying. As crazy as it sounds.
That is crazy. But yeah, you're right. I guess at a certain age, you age out and then that you're an adult and you don't want to live there as an adult.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? You know,
I'm
yeah.
glad I flunked the Spanish because
Yeah.
that was not
Yeah.
a good decision.
Oh my God, that's so crazy. Yeah. So I've always been fascinated because you do see conflicting messages online. You see, I'm like, wait, because you see like all this horror story, which I know is probably true, but then you also see regular stuff, like just people having parties and like, where did they get their clothes? Like, is it that bad? Like, so I've always been curious for people that actually have been there because it's very confusing to think how bad is it? Or I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many questions.
Yeah, I mean, how bad is it? I think it just, I think the worst thing now as an adult looking back is the indoctrination portion of it, all that comes with communism, that you can see it replicated in every other communist place that we're exposed to. I remember coming back that first year, and I say this in one of my TikTok videos, but I remember coming back that first year, crazy, right? I lived here all my life. I go 1 year to Cuba, one
Mhm.
year. I come back and I'm in the airport and I see the immigration men, right? So it was like these white, tall men, wearing their immigration things or whatever. And I look at my mom and I say, look at these Yankees, like with disgust. And my mom looked at me and she's like, what are you talking about? What's
Yeah.
Yankee? What is this? And it was all the indoctrination that we received.
Wow.
Like I hated Americans.
That's
Why?
so
Like I have no
interesting.
idea.
That's so crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's so true. It's like that's why I'm always everyone's like, oh, the people are born that way. I'm like, your environment has so much to do with how
Absolutely.
you think, how you see the world. Like it is a thing. It's huge. It's huge.
100%, 100%. And I mean, I think I'm smart. I went over there after living, but they still get to you because when you hear it enough times, when you see it, when your whole world is that, you're going to believe it.
It's like a cult.
It's like I was going to say that it's like a cult, 100%.
Cuba's a cult.
Yeah. And
Do
then
you,
of course I came here. My mom was like, "Oh, yeah, niña, like don't, like don't be crazy, whatever." Because she's very anti-communist and whatever. So she was like, no, it's not like that. And then I went back and I was already like aware. So it was different the second time around.
no, it's crazy because back in the day, it was a fabulous place. I mean, Frank Sinatra, all the celebrities would hang out in La
Yeah.
Tropicana in Cuba, and it was like such fabulous. It was gorgeous,
Yeah.
and it's like an island. It's gorgeous. Did you go to the beach a lot? Was that close
So
to you?
the beaches in Cuba are not the best beaches in the world. And I'm
Okay,
sorry if anyone gets offended by that, but they're really not. Like I've been to Thailand, I've been to, don't go too far, Bahamas, Puerto Rico. I've been to a lot of places in the world, even Dubai. And they have, those are beautiful beaches. Baradero, which everyone talks about and it's the best beach in the world. I don't think it is.
right. Do you think it's because it's just not maintained, or
It's not maintained and there's nothing like out of this world. It's just a beach. Like it has white sands, but I've seen nicer beaches, right?
yeah,
But again, I think this comes again because the second part of the indoctrination that Fidel did was also Cubans are the best. Cubans are the best. We have the best beaches, we have the prettiest girls, we have the most intelligent people, the best doctors. Everyone will tell you Cuban doctors are the best. So everything was the best. We were also made to believe that.
but do the hospitals have air conditioning? Like I can't get past the air conditioning. How do they? I mean,
You're like traumatized with the AC. You're
need
like, how do you survive?
you're sick. You need AC.
No,
That's wild. I
you,
mean,
you
all
don't
the
really
fact,
need AC,
well,
right?
the bacteria grows in heat.
Yeah, but you don't necessarily need. I mean, there's going to be bacteria for sure. And the hospitals. I thank God I never got sick. I never went to a hospital, but I had friends that did, and it was like just it
Yeah,
was dirty. It was they didn't have like enough equipment. Granted, the doctors. First of all, I think the doctors because of the struggle, they become better doctors because they have to figure it out, right?
right.
And the education, I would say the education was at that time, I don't know now, but was very good in Cuba. When I went there, my math was like a fourth grader and I was in seventh grade. So I had to go to like math tutoring and things like that because the education was just like, up there.
I mean, I would assume anything you try to do over there, you're going to excel because you don't have technology. So you're not stuck watching TV. You're on your phone. Like you have more time to do other things,
Yeah.
which. But do you think Cuba's ever going to get back to normal? Like after Fidel's brother dies, like, do you think it's possible?
I don't think, a lot of people were hoping that after Fidel, things were going to go back to, but it's not. Fidel is just a person that was there. Then another person comes and continues the whole thing. It's not about the president going down. It's about the system, right? The system is going to continue. It's just going, it's just going to get worse. And I think that if one day it does change, a lot of people are going to start having to adapt to the new changes because
Mhm.
again you're going from communism to capitalism and it's just you have to change your mindset, you have to change the way you do things. Now you have to pay taxes, now this, now that. So a lot of things that people aren't used to doing over there.
I think they'll be excited though, because I'm sure. I mean, there's so many people. We're so capable of stuff as human beings, and they're probably excited to try new stuff. It would have to be someone that gets into office, like maybe kind of like what he did, like kind of lie about it, and then when he gets there, he's like, "No, I want everything to change back.
Mhm.
I see so much opportunity." So maybe, hopefully, that will happen.
Yeah, and it's The issue with communism is that theoretically it sounds great. Like if you read the Mark Engel and all those things, which we got fed that we had to read. So if you read that, theoretically it sounds like a beautiful society, but guess what? It's fiction. It's
Mhm.
fiction. It's not practical. And a lot of it is also because you have a cap. You cannot grow more. So when
Mhm.
you don't allow human beings to grow more, then their motivation goes down.
Yeah, no, of course. It's like you're a caged animal. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, this is so interesting. I love it. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? I think that's all my questions.
I mean, I would say, when people hear these stories, they're very quick to jump and kind of comment and say,
Mhm.
well, my experience when I went there as a tourist, remember, your experience as a tourist anywhere in this world is limited. Is completely limited. You're treated differently, you're seen differently. You don't live like everyone else. You really want to get the good experience, live there, and really live where the people live, and you'll be able to really see what that culture is all about.
Yeah. I have friends that have visited and I have no interest because for me it's super sad.
Hmm.
And the reality of it, I'm like, why would I just don't. It is interesting. I've always said this. People risk their lives coming to the US to live differently, but then they spend all their extra money trying to travel to all these third world countries. I'm like, this, it's like,
Well, I mean,
doesn't make sense.
it's interesting, right? People like to see things that are prohibited or that are, because it is sort of like prohibited in some way. Like there's certain hotels that Americans cannot stay in,
Hmm.
right? That you're not supposed to stay in because they're clearly, with the government. So there's like this whole list, if you look it up, of places that you can go as that you shouldn't go as an American, as per United
Right.
States.
Right.
But people like to go to the unknown. They like to, check it out. And again, if you go as a tourist, you're gonna see all the beautiful places. Yes, you're gonna see the houses like broken down and things like that. But if you don't go into it, you're not really exposed to it, right? So Cuba's gonna look beautiful. You're gonna have a great time, yes. But is that the reality that people live? Absolutely not.
I know. It's wild. I hope to see a change in my lifetime though.
Yeah.
It's just like Iran. They used to be in 1970s. They were a normal place, people in little shorts and tank tops in the summer in the beach. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, this new thing comes in and completely puts it on its head, and it's completely ruined it, and it's completely different. And it's just crazy how it could just change
Yeah,
overnight. And so I'm
absolutely.
hoping it'll do that again for the
Yeah.
better, maybe. Well, thank you so much, Monica. Hopefully, we'll talk again.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely. Invite me whenever you want to chat. And I always, again, the reason why I opened this social media and all this wasn't to become like Instagram famous or whatever, or to get my, whatever. I really don't care about that. But I'm a psychologist, so I've told my clients to do the same, right? Like you should learn to process your traumas or the things that have impacted you. So I really opened it up to do that. I opened it up to kind of share, and even doing this is like a therapeutic process for me.
yeah,
So thank you.
it's like writing a book, but you're
It's
just
right.
speaking, or
Yep,
writing in your journal, but you're speaking it.
absolutely, absolutely,
All
yes.
right. Well, we'll see you next time.
All right,
Bye.
Lisa, thank you.